Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Tuesday, June 30th. I'm Brian Moline. Only about 2% of aircraft pilots and flight engineers are black. A group of men, inspired by the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, is trying to change that by highlighting aviation careers.
We don't talk about becoming aviation or aviators at the dinner table. It's just not something that's common in our culture. We'll talk about doctors, we'll talk about lawyers.
Brandon Azim paid a visit to a Kansas City air school to learn why that number is so low. Coming up on The Gateway. Ameren customers in Missouri may pay more for their electricity next year. As St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin reports, the utility is asking permission to raise its rates by 10%.
The state's Public Service Commission must approve any increase. It'll give the public a chance to weigh in before deciding. Any change would go into effect mid-2027. Ameren Missouri says it needs higher rates to pay for investments it's already made, like repairing power lines and installing new technology to identify and fix outages faster. Rob Dixon of Ameren Missouri says the upgrades are needed to provide the service customers want.
They expect that power to be there in the hottest days like we're experiencing right now and the coldest nights of the winter. And we have improved the resiliency of the grid to stand up to severe weather like we experience regularly in our region.
Ameren Missouri also raised rates last year and in 2023. I'm Jeremy Goodwin, St. Louis Public Radio.
The Kirkwood Police Department has come up with a new way to deal with fireworks violations around July 4th, a drone. Gary Baldridge is the department's community service officer. He says the department has had a drone for a few years. He says the department has developed new ways to use it, and this year it's for fireworks complaints.
What we intend to do with the drone is alleviate some of the stress and be able to respond quicker to some of the addresses that we get complaints on.
The drone will play a pre-recorded message reminding the resident of the violation, and the police may then dispatch officers. Baldridge says the department meets all requirements to operate a drone. The personal possession and discharge of fireworks are illegal in Kirkwood. The owner of several St. Louis radio stations, including KMOX, has reached a deal to sell them. Odyssey has agreed to sell the stations to the Hoffman family of companies. The move builds on David Hoffman's growing media holdings, which already include a majority stake in the parent company of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Hoffman says his goal is to build one of the largest print and digital news organizations in the country. Other stations included in the sale are KEZK and Y98. The deal still needs approval from the Federal Communications Commission. A conservative radio host is making a push to succeed retiring Congressman Sam Graves. St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum reports on how Chris Stegall plans to navigate a competitive Republican primary.
Stegall received Graves' endorsement in the GOP primary for the 6th District, which takes in most of northern Missouri. His main Republican opponent, Kansas City Councilman Nathan Willett, blasted that decision as an example of insiders trying to choose the next congressman. But Stegall says Graves and other key Republicans backing his campaign know he'll do a better job.
The only endorsement that matters are the voters of North Missouri. They don't care who endorses any candidate, really. They're going to give you their endorsement and their vote if they're convinced that you're the guy to send to Washington.
Both Stegall and Willett have similar views, including their support for the Iran war and Donald Trump's tariffs. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio.
You can listen to Stegall's Politically Speaking interview and Willett's by going to stlpr.org. Missouri agriculture officials are tightening livestock import rules to help keep the New World screwworm out of the state. Effective immediately, animals entering Missouri from states with infested zones must have a veterinary inspection certificate issued within 14 days. The certificate must confirm the animals are free of the flesh-eating parasite. No cases have been reported in Missouri. All of the confirmed U.S. cases in the current outbreak have been in Texas. Officials say the screwworm poses no threat to the safety of the nation's meat supply, but anyone who suspects an infected animal should contact their veterinarian right away. The average amount of credit card debt carried by Missourians is just over $4,000. That's according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. The Fed also reports credit card delinquency rates have increased in the state. That's when you're more than 30 days late paying your bill. The delinquency rates are comparable to the financial crisis of 2008. Here's Juan Sanchez, an economic researcher with the St. Louis Fed.
I would say the last couple of years is increasing, but kind of stable. Is a share of people struggling to make credit card payment high? I would say yes.
A 2026 Debt.com survey found that a little more than half of U.S. adults are using credit cards for necessities. An Illinois judge denied a nonprofit's request to restore federal funding for tutoring and care programs for at-risk students on Friday. As St. Louis Public Radio's Hiba Ahmed reports, 2 schools in East St. Louis will lose funding as early as this week.
The judge denied a request for a preliminary injunction filed by Act Now Illinois, which is a nonprofit that administers the grant. Canceling the funds will impact 32 schools across the state. That includes 2 elementary schools in East St. Louis, which were set to receive $5 million over the course of 5 years. The U.S. Department of Education canceled the funding for Illinois in December, claiming it did not align with the Trump administration's priorities. Act Now Executive Director Susan Stanton says the impact on districts will be immediate.
Who knows how devastating those impacts will be, not only in the short term, but long term for these children and their success.
East St. Louis school districts say the loss of funds will force them to scale down programs starting this fall. I'm Hiba Ahmed, St. Louis Public Radio.
Several lanes along Interstate 270 near Interstate 64 will be closed overnight this week. The Missouri Department of Transportation says the work is part of a longer project to replace the highway's bridges over Conway and Ladue roads. Tonight, night crews will close 2 southbound lanes as well as the ramp that gets drivers from eastbound 64 to northbound 270. 2 northbound lanes of 270 and the ramp from westbound 64 to northbound 270 will close overnight tomorrow. The founders of Kansas City's Red Tail Academy are trying to grow the relatively small number of black people in the aviation industry. Brandon Azim visits the flight school to find out how.
Alternator, magnetos.
Terrain system test, okay.
On a partly cloudy Thursday evening, planes are taking off and landing on the runway of the Charles B. Wheeler Downtown Airport. Just outside one of the hangars, sitting inside a red Piper Archer in a Chiefs shirt with an afro, is 23-year-old Davion Stokes. With a checklist in his hand, he's quickly inspecting the plane's systems. Stokes says he's always dreamed of becoming a certified pilot thanks to his grandfather who took him to air shows.
My grandpa, when I was little, he would take me they used to have an air show up here. And it just kind of like planted a seed almost, like it was like cool to get into, you know.
As a teenager, he began training to become a pilot with Red Tail Academy. Thanks to the rigorous instruction, Stokes had his private and commercial license by the time he was 19 years old. But when Stokes lands at different airports, he notices something out of the ordinary. He notices the lack of black pilots.
I would say just about none. One of my instructors was actually black, but besides that, it's hard to come around, you know, to seeing somebody who looks like me. It's very, very rare.
According to Data USA, a little over 2% of aircraft pilots and flight engineers were black in 2024. Patrick Nelson, a former community outreach specialist for the Aviation Institute of Maintenance, got together with several other black aviation specialists to create a school to address the disparity.
So this whole exposure is kind of like when you walk there.
At an open hangar in front of a blue Cirrus 22, known as the Cadillac of the sky, Nelson said becoming a pilot isn't something that's brought up in most households.
We don't talk about becoming aviation or aviators at the dinner table. It's just not something that's common in our culture. We'll talk about doctors, we'll talk about lawyers, we'll talk about hopefully getting a sports type deal, whether it be basketball, football, but we never talk about that.
The name Red Tail refers to an all-black Air Force group known as the Tuskegee Airmen who carried out key missions during World War II. The nonprofit was founded in 2020 and provides 12 to 19-year-old kids from underrepresented communities with training to become pilots or learn other aviation skills. Nelson said not many kids in communities of color get exposure to these type of careers, so Red Tail Academy makes school visits to introduce them to what the possibilities are and to spark their curiosity. Nelson explains they're not just talking to kids about the fun of flying, they're also talking economics.
Average salary for a pilot, $200,000. So most of the people we work with, if you put $200,000 as an annual salary in your household, it's going to change the family financial dynamic of your household.
It takes from 5 to 7 years to get certified as a private pilot and can cost up to $20,000. Red Tail subsidizes most of the training, but some students drop out before finishing. Then Red Tail eats the loss. The organization is doing all right financially, but it's challenging not knowing if that future pilot investment will fall through. That's where groups like the National Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals are helping. Albert Glenn sits on the advisory board and is working to spread the word that there's a market for new black pilots.
When you think about baby boomers and how large that group was and how many of them are retiring, there's a lot of replacements, and there is not a lot falling in behind that are joining in.
Back at the downtown airport, Stokes is finishing the task on his pilot's checklist. Once inspired by air shows his grandpa took him to, he's now inspired by the possibility of training a new generation of black aviators. Specifically, Stokes said people who look like him.
Community is very important, especially community that looks like you. That's probably the most important part.
One day, he hopes to meet a pilot from that community in a pilot's uniform, flying a plane somewhere far away. I'm Brandon Azim.
That story comes to us from member station KCUR in Kansas City. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Brian Moldine, in for Abby Larico, and from the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, thanks for listening to The Gateway.